Good morning. How are you guys? I hope you're doing well. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers that are here in the room. I hope today's an amazing day and you feel celebrated. Let me open with a story. When I was it was probably my youngest daughter was about 3 years old. So I was a much younger parent at that point in time. And we were just hanging out for the day. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to take you to the park because I don't like sitting still. You don't like sitting still. Let's do this together and we'll go run around. And so we did. We went to the park and she wanted to go on the swings, immediately ran up to the swing set, but the swings were all taken. And so she sat down just waiting like for this girl who was swinging on the swing to stop swinging. And she waited and she waited and she waited. And I found myself going like, wow, I'm actually pretty proud of her. Like she waited a long time, like nice work. And all of a sudden the girl's mom yells and is like, hey, you got to give somebody else a turn. You got to get off of there. And so she gets off and my daughter, after patiently waiting, gets on the swing, starts kicking her legs, swinging. She's having a great time. This little boy runs over. And he comes and like stands in front of where the swing is and she doesn't want to hit him. So she hits her legs like and drags herself to a stop. And the moment she comes to a stop, he runs behind her, pushes her face first off the swing and she lands flat with her face in the sand, like just poof, straight out of the swing. I had been sitting pretty far, like I was, not right next to her. I was right over here, but I'm watching this whole thing happen. I watch her fall and her head pops up and she's got a little dirt on her face and she looks at the boy and she's offended. She goes, ow, that hurt. And then she looks and we make eye contact. She looks at me and you ever seen that look on your kid's face where it's like, Dad, what do I do? And then all of a sudden her eyes flush with tears and she looks at me and now it's not, Dad, what do I do? It's, Dad, what are you gonna do? That type of moment. You guys, I didn't even realize it. I had already covered half the playground. I was moving so quickly. And my hands are clenched and my jaw is tight because I need to go end this little 3-year-old. And I know you laugh. But like, in all honesty, there was a part of me where it was like, and now he dies. Like, that's what happens. I know it's weird. But like, I'm in my early 30s, probably there, late 20s, early 30s. And I'm going to go beat up a 3-year-old. Like, this is the mission that is in front of me. I've completely lost my mind. Like, I'm not even thinking about it. As I'm walking over there, her mom, or this kid's mom, this little boy's mom comes running over and is just like, no, you cannot push people. Did you hurt her? Did you say sorry? Makes this little boy apologize and then says, you have to be patient and you have to wait your turn. And they both look and they're like, I'm so sorry. And they help her get out of the dirt. And there was something about what this mom did in that moment that just gave me enough pause to realize my hands are clenched. My jaw is tight. I am moving quickly. I'm a grown man who's going to go beat up a child. It's like, what is wrong with me? Like, what just happened? It's so weird how protective you can get with your own kids in ways that you wouldn't in any other sphere of your life. And yet it happens. And it's just like in a moment, all it took was like 2 moments, watching her waiting patiently and not getting a turn and then getting pushed out unfairly. And I'm like, okay. And I'm lost. Who I am, who I most want to be, who I most desire to live and exist in this world is lost. Now I'm a grown man who beats up children. Let's go. That's like where I was. It's so easy for that to happen so quickly. Have you ever had a moment where you got caught up in something difficult? It could be a moment. It could be a long moment, like a series of time. And there's like a frustration or something that you hold and you find yourself suddenly acting in a way where you look and you're like, this isn't me. Like, don't get me wrong, it is you, you're doing it, but you're like, this isn't who I really am. And yet now I'm operating this way. See, life is inevitably filled with hard moments. And we hate this, we do. We read like news feeds and articles and we read self-help books because we're like, if I could just hack my life so that all of the others, like I can smooth it all out and everything can go swimmingly and I won't have any of these issues anymore. And yet that's not how life works, is it? You can learn so much, you can do so well. And then tomorrow life throws something at you or some weird moment happens and it's filled with complexities and difficulty because that's what makes up a real life. It's just part of this deal. And when those moments hit us, especially when we go through a season of it, it's just so easy to lose sight of who we really are and who we really want to be in this world and find yourself looking at yourself going like, is this me? Did I lose myself along the way? Think about this. Being a parent can be really hard, can't it? There's probably a lot of kids in here that are like, being a kid can be really hard too. And it can. It's hard to have a relationship with your parent. It's hard to have a relationship with your children, right? Have you ever had a moment as a parent where maybe you found yourself and your teenager did something frustrating, or the kid in your life did something really frustrating, or maybe they were supposed to do something, they didn't do it, or they didn't do something they were supposed to do, and then and it just all got weird. Or maybe they did something that started to make your life more and more complicated, and now everything was a little bit harder and frustrating, and the house is tense. And then you started acting out of that, and you started operating as a parent. Have you ever had the moment as a parent where you look to your left and your right, and you're like, I am so glad nobody was here to witness with me right now? Like, I've had this moment, where you just suddenly look and you're like, it's like I lost who I was for a second. I am so thankful that there's like not another human being recording this somehow, because this isn't who I most want to be. You ever been in a relationship and some things happened in that relationship? It could be a romantic relationship, it could be a friendship, it could be any relationship, but all of a sudden you felt a little insecure, or it felt a little strange. And then you started reacting in a weird way. You started getting more defensive, or you started getting more passive aggressive, or you started getting more competitive. And it starts to change the dynamic of that relationship. And all of a sudden you find yourself just going like, this used to be really life-giving, and now I'm at this spot where it's picking at each other and frustrating, and this isn't who I really am. And you find yourself going, how do I get back to who I am and to what matters most? Because it's easy to lose yourself along the way. Or have you ever been at work or school and you suddenly realize that there were people saying things about you? And you thought to yourself, I hate that. So then you're like, let's fight fire with fire. And you started saying things about them. Or you started mixing into that same dynamic right back. And then you get to a space where you look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, the very thing I hated, I've become. When did this become who I am? This isn't me. This isn't who I really want to be. And yet, here I am. It's so easy, depending on what you find yourself facing in life, when we go through seasons of difficulty, it can be a moment, it can be a season of tension, whatever it is, that we lose ourselves. It's like we become unanchored at some point in time, and the best of who we are goes out the window, and we start living based on our circumstances and our reactions. And here's the point of today's message. It's this: life is going to be full of moments where there are difficulties. That's part of a very real life. And so if that's true, if we're going to face difficult moments and frustration as a normal part of this life, then let's choose to act in a way where we like who we are when all of it is said and done, right? If we're going to go through difficulty, if we're going to go through tensions, and that's inevitable, then rather than letting those things direct us, let's choose in the midst of those moments, as we make our way through this meaningful thing called life, this complicated and weird thing called life, as we make our way through, let's choose to act in a way where we actually like who we are at the end of the day, when all is said and done. And that's the thing I want to talk to us about and spend some time on here this morning. We're going to look in the book of Genesis. One of my favorite characters in the book of Genesis, his name is Joseph. It's an amazing story. I'll be candid with you. The story of Joseph spans several chapters. It's Mother's Day, and you don't have enough time for that. So I'm going to try to just take snapshots here and land at a couple of things. I'd encourage you, if you love this story, you're intrigued, go read this. It's towards the end. We're going to start at the very beginning, Genesis chapter 37. Let me give you an introduction to Joseph. This is how the Bible wants you to meet Joseph, right? The writers of the scripture, this is how they want you to meet Joseph. It's this. Genesis 37, beginning of verse 2. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. So these are his brothers. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel, and this, if you've ever heard of the character in the Old Testament, Jacob and Israel are the same person. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. Verse 4, but when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his other brothers, they hated him, and they could not speak peacefully to him. This is the intro to Joseph. Joseph is about 17 years old. In this particular culture, that would make him, like, you could consider him to be an adult. He's old enough to go out on his own even, type of a thing. But the scriptures doesn't see him that way. It wants us to know that it sees him as a boy. And part of the reason why is because he's the second youngest. He's one of the youngest in his family. And he's got a very large family, lots and lots of brothers. And so he's one of the youngest, so they see him as younger, and that's how this goes. And we're told that he's also the favorite of his father. And the problem isn't that Joseph knows he's the favorite. The problem is that everybody else knows he's the favorite too. If any of you ever grew up in a household where you knew that there was a favorite in that house, how did it go? Not great, right? Some of you just immediately, you're like, your stomach is still tight, like since I brought that piece up, because it can be hard. Right? It creates competition and jealousy and frustration and all of these different things. This happens, and yet this is what's true. Joseph also, we're told, that he essentially spends his time in this moment tattling on his brothers. He goes out in the field and he plays spy for his dad, and he comes back and he's like, here's what my older brothers aren't doing well. Here's what's happening out there, and reports that back into his dad. And we're also told, the Bible tells us, that they came to hate him. This is the intro to Joseph. They came to hate him. That's how his story begins. So it's like, welcome, this is Joseph. His dad loves him. His brothers all hate him. That's the beginning of the story. Like, that's what you're taught from the very beginning. And it's not just, like, as we go to talk about this, think of this. Joseph is going through a series of difficult circumstances and tensions, just like we would. And the problem is not that his dad sees him as his favorite. That's his dad's tension to deal with. Joseph can't change that or do anything like that's not his issue to wrestle with, right? But I bet you there are probably some things Joseph could have done differently to make the situation a little better between him and his brothers. I bet you there's some ways he could have operated and done this, but instead they hate him. In fact, it says they can't speak anything peacefully about him, which means there's backbiting, there's insults, there's passive aggression, there's tension, there's all the things that come when there's frustration mounting in relationships. And this is his family. You know what that means? He's not going anywhere. This is going to go with him. Right? This is in his family. This is with his brothers. He's not moving away. He's not leaving town. This is sitting in his life. This is like one of those moments like you and I will face where there's just life happening. There's a series of circumstances and situations, some of which we predicted or caused, some of which we didn't. They just happened. But it's gotten tense and it's gotten weird. And now Joseph has to decide what he might want to do about it, because this is his very real, very weird life. So here's what he does. Joseph has a dream where he and his brothers are all in a field, and represented in this dream, there's this moment where he stands up tall and his brothers all kneel down before him. So Joseph has a dream where all of his brothers will bow down before him. And he wakes up from that dream. And Joseph, because he gets to decide who he most wants to be in this life. Joseph gets to decide what he most wants to do, how he most wants to move forward. And you know what Joseph does? He's like, I'm going to tell my brothers about that dream for sure. And that's what he does. Right? He could have made any other choice, but he doesn't. Instead, he goes and he's like, I'm going to tell my brothers about this particular dream. Can you imagine that particular moment unfolding as Joseph walks in? So, hey guys, just so you know, good morning. Hope your breakfast is tasting great, because it's about to not. And I had a dream last night. You might even call it a vision. You might even say it was from God, like maybe even authoritative. You might take it that way. But essentially, in my dream, like I rose up really high and you all bowed down before me. And I just thought you might want to know that. Hope you enjoy your breakfast, gents. Right? Like that's what's shared. That's essentially what he does. He goes and he tells them this dream. This is one of those moments where if you're standing there, you immediately recognize, you're like, Joseph, that's something that even if it happened to you, even if you think that that's true, you should keep that in your head and not let that leave your mouth, because that doesn't help anybody right now. There's nothing anybody can do with that. This was unkind. Why would you even share that? Well, if everybody hates you and is speaking against you and doing these things and you react to that, you know what you might want to do? Yeah, well, check out the dream I had and slide that back in their direction. Genesis 37, verse 8, his brothers react. It says, his brothers said to him, are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Not just that he had the dream, but what he said, how he engaged, how he went about it. Right? They hated him even more. This keeps escalating. Okay, so you probably think to yourself, that didn't go really well. And every moment's a new opportunity, so I get to learn. I shared the dream. That resulted in just more hatred, more chaos, more tension, more social isolation in my family. I should probably learn from this. Who do I most want to be? What do I most want to do? Joseph gets to make that decision again. You know what he does? He has another dream. This time in his dream, it's not just his brothers, but actually his parents also that are there, and everyone is bowing to him once again. And he wakes up and he's like, bright idea again. You know what I'm going to do? Not learn from any of the moments that I've just experienced, not live out of the best of who I am, not do those pieces. I'm going to go share this same thing with my brothers, because I bet it goes different this time. And he does. He goes out and he shares this with his brothers, and this time with his father. His father is insulted. And then verse 11 tells us that his brothers became increasingly jealous of him. And the situation keeps getting worse, keeps compounding, keeps escalating. Right? Here's what I believe is happening here. See, like I said, Joseph can't control whether he's his dad's favorite or not. That's up to his dad. It's not up to Joseph. He can't control that. But essentially, Joseph has an issue he's navigating, and it's creating all this tension in his house, and he gets to figure out, amidst the tension, amidst the difficulty, amidst the complexity, how does he want to move forward? Who does he want to be as he walks his way through this. But instead of living out of who he most wants to be, he forgets the ancient Hebrew proverb that snitches get stitches, and he goes out spying for his dad, right? That's not going to help him with his brother. Instead of being who he most wants to be, he goes and essentially says, I had a dream, and lords it over them. And even though like in our culture, the second to youngest has the least influence and the least authority and all of these things, I'm going to violate culture. I'm going to violate relationship. I'm going to tell you about a little dream I had where you all bow to me and you'll take it fine, which doesn't happen. And instead of learning from that moment, centering back in on who he most desires to be and on who he really is and letting that move through his difficult circumstances, tensions, and relationships, he just doubles down and keeps coming back to the same thing. And he does this twice. And each time it gets worse and worse. They hate him more and more and more. Things get more difficult. Things get more tense because oftentimes when we let our circumstances around us determine our behavior, when we let the behavior of other people dictate our reactions, it gets worse and worse. And this creates more jealousy, hatred, and things keep getting worse. Genesis 37, verse 19. His brothers come together. They said to one another as they see Joseph walking up, here comes this dreamer. He's no longer Joseph now. He's just a label. Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Guys, if you think you grew up in a pretty dysfunctional family, this is a big sentence, right? Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. That's horrible. And you know what? They don't just say it, they do it. They take his robe from him. They strip him basically and throw him into a pit. And they're like, we're going to leave him for dead there. And then one of them's like, well, you shouldn't leave him for dead. Let's sell him into slavery. And they're like, that's a way better idea. So they sell him into slavery. And he's taken off to become a slave of the Egyptians. And they take this tattered coat like that they've ruined. And they said, look, an animal attacked him and his dad believes he's dead. Like this story gets dark really fast, really quick right here. Joseph literally ends up in the pits. Like this is literally what happens. Friends, there's so many things that will happen in this life that are beyond our control. We will face tensions, we will face complexities, we will face difficult moments, we will face hard circumstances. We will always find ourselves in moments of life where we are navigating things we wish weren't happening. And in those moments, we can find ourselves acting out of the best of who we are and moving forward because of who we most want to be, who we believe God's created us to be, or we can find ourselves living out of a version of ourselves where we lose ourselves. Living like someone we don't even recognize anymore, or someone that we don't know. And this is a big, big deal as we navigate through our lives. And so I wanted to give us a question this morning. And I'll tell you this, a question to ask yourself that I'll tell you, I ask myself this question at least once a day. I have for a couple of years now, sometimes even twice a day. It's been a tremendous gift in just reorienting my own heart sometimes in my own life, like a compass sometimes in this. And I just thought, maybe this would be a blessing to you all as well. And that question is this. In the moments of a difficulty or a tension, ask yourself, will you like who you are on the other side of this moment? It's when you pause, and rather than just going, how do I feel? What do I think? What am I going to do? It's actually pausing, being like, I'm in a moment right now. And I know I'm going to act on something. I know I'm going to do something. I know I'm going to say something. Will I like who I am when all this is said and done? If I imagine this day ending, if I imagine this moment being over, will I like who I am on the other side of this moment? See, I believe this has this powerful pull inside of us when you ask this question to actually recenter you back in on who you most want to be. To recenter you back in on perhaps what matters most and how you actually want to step forward in this life. I mean, think about it. If Joseph had asked that question, you know what I believe? I believe that it would have changed the way he approached his brothers and fathers. I do. I think if he paused at any point in time and like, this whole family is starting to hate me. I'm my dad's favorite. That's creating all kinds of problems. I live in a house where I'm increasingly isolated and people are frustrated and the tensions are rising and I have to navigate that situation because that's my life. So who do I most want to be regardless of all of that when all of this is said and done, and how do I show up to my life that way? You think that would have changed some of the things? I bet it would have. And don't get me wrong, God uses all of this for good and amazing things as the story unfolds. But I think it would have been important. Think about this in your own life. Maybe you've been struggling in a marriage or a romantic relationship, and in what was really good and life-giving and beautiful, all of a sudden there's like a frustration that's happened or a hurt that's happened. Maybe even bitterness has set in. And so now you keep reacting back and forth with one another, and the dynamic between the two of you has turned into who can win the argument. And you start to approach each other like I need to defend against you, or I need to be aggressive towards you, or I need to push back against these things, like the other person becomes an obstacle and you're stuck in this loop or this dynamic, and you find yourself, do you ever get to a moment, if you've ever found yourself in that place in a relationship where you step back and you go, I feel like I'm losing myself. Like I feel like the best of who I am is not what's showing up to my life right now, and how did I get here? Like I know how I got here, but it can feel like you're losing yourself a little bit. What would happen if you asked yourself the question, you know what, in this next moment before I walk into the room where they are, before I speak, before I act, before I do, I'm going to just pause and ask myself the question, I'm right here now, but when I walk into that room, who do I most want to be when all this is said and done? Will I like who I am when this is over? And you let that reorient your compass. You let that reorient your insides just a little bit. Now, here's the truth. If you're in a relationship, you know that a relationship changes because two people in a relationship shift a dynamic and they change. You can only be responsible for your half of that piece. But you know what? If you start asking yourself this question, who do I most want to be when all of this is said and done, and you trust God with that, and you start to reorient your compass this way, you know what it has the powerful capacity to do? Change your behavior. And when you start to change your behavior, you create the potential or the possibility that maybe this relationship can move out of the dynamic you've been in and back into an honest one where you're living out of who you most desire to be. And that's powerful. It is. That becomes a powerful thing. Maybe you're in a difficult situation at work. You ever find yourself working in a place where you feel like my work keeps operating with me, or my boss keeps treating me in a way where I feel like I'm supposed to compromise who I am? And it's getting like I feel the pressure of this, and I'm starting to get resentful, and I'm starting to get frustrated, and I'm starting to like wanting to act out in this, or I'm starting to want to pull back and just not bring my best to what I do and just kind of halfway do things, or be a cynic at work, or be cold and distant, or all of these pieces. And you're like, but that's not who I am. That's not who I really am. And yet you find yourself moving and shifting internally like you're losing yourself a little bit. What would happen if you began to ask yourself when you're sitting in the car before you get out of the car to walk into the office or wherever it is you work, and you're like, okay, I'm going to get out of my car and I'm going to go there, but God, help me center right now. Who do I most want to be as I walk in there? Another way to ask this, when all of this is said and done, when I get back in my car at the end of the day, will I like who I am? Because I've lived out of who God made me to be. And center yourself there, and then walk into the circumstances, letting that be an anchor for you in your day. See, whatever your difficulty is, whatever tensions it is that you face, you're normal. That's like you're a human being. That's part of life. You're not crazy. You're not weird. This is just a very normal part of life, whether it's in work or romance or family or politic or friends or enemies, whatever it is that you might face. What would happen if you began to ask the question, will I like who I am when all of this is said and done? It powerfully reorients your compass. Joseph's life literally had to become the pits for him to learn this piece. I don't think our life has to be the same thing. But his life does, it changes. You know, he sold as a slave into Egypt. We would look at that part of the story, and this happens in Genesis 39 where he goes to Egypt. We would look at that part of the story and we would say, I mean, he lost his life. Like he lost his homeland, he lost his family, he lost everything that's important. Like everything's over, this is done. And yet that's not actually how the story unfolds. Genesis 39 verse 2, it says, the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his Egyptian master, a man named Potiphar. Guys, isn't that crazy? He steps into the house of this guy named Potiphar as a slave, and Joseph makes the choice to bring the best of who he is. And he actually starts to thrive in horrible circumstances. He starts to thrive in a situation he never wanted to be a part of. See, he doesn't change the situation, but it changes who he is in it. It changes that dynamic. He brings the best of who he is. Would you have judged him if he looked at his life and said, I'm done. I'm a cynic from here on out. I have lost my life, and so I'm going to shrink in this one. I'm not going to be an amazing slave. I'm going to be a resistant person. I'm going to be wherever I'm put. I'm in rebellion to that thing now because this isn't fair. This isn't just, and this isn't good. Right? This is not the life I wanted. We wouldn't judge him for that. We'd be like, this would be really hard. But he doesn't. Instead, and this becomes a pattern that we see from this point forward in Joseph's life, and it makes his story so inspiring. He brings the best of who he really is to whatever it is that life seems to throw at him, which is a lot. So I found myself thinking, you know what? I think it's a hard question to ask myself. Am I going to like who I am at the end of the day? When this moment's over, will I really like who I am? I think sometimes that can be a hard moment to do. Sometimes it can be a hard thing to pause in. So I just thought, what are some things that help us with this? And I wanted to point to 3 of them, and here's the first. If you're gonna ask yourself that question and be honest about it and wrestle with it, I think you need to know that God is with you. That's the first thing that I'd love to point out. That God is with you. Oftentimes what happens is we face difficult circumstances and these become like final for us. These become the end of the story. These become the moment. 3 times in Genesis chapter 39, the author tells us, the Lord was with Joseph. When he was taken into slavery in Egypt, the Lord was with Joseph. When he ends up getting locked in prison later, yes, that happens. The Lord was with Joseph. Each time, 3 times, the Lord was with Joseph, the most commonly repeated phrase. When an Old Testament author repeats something that many times, by the end, it's like they're shouting at you, I want you to know the Lord is with Joseph. And the author's trying to show us there's something important about seeing when God is with us. And here's why. When you know that God is with you, you know that this moment is just your moment, but it's not the end of the story. When you know that God is with you, you know that this is a difficulty that you're facing. This is not the sum total of the life that you're living. When you know that God is with you, you know that there's not a period at the end of a sentence because he who defies limitations is actually in and amidst with you. And so there's a part of it where it changes your orientation and you get the freedom to say, wait, this is not my end. I will have a moment in the future. So I get to ask myself the question, will I like who I am at the end of the day? Because God is with me now. I get the courage to even do it. I get the courage to even wrestle with it, knowing that I'm not alone and that he is active and moving in and through this. He is with me. It's Mother's Day, so I thought I'd share a story about my mom. A few years ago, my parents were moving and out of the house that I'd grown up in for a very long time and moving into a new place. And so they called and said, hey, we have a bunch of books on the shelf. Do you want to come see if you want any of those? And I said, sure. So I came over and I'm looking at the shelf of books that I've looked at probably 100 times in my life. And I saw a book that I don't remember ever seeing before, and it was on parenting. And I pulled this book off, and it was a study guide or a study book from a class my mom had taken on parenting when I was 4 years old. And she was probably a brand new Christian or just becoming one at that point in time, like just taking steps with the church or anything for the very first time. This was all very new for her. And she was the first in our family to do that. And I was a really hard kid. I was a really difficult kid. And I know some of you guys are like, yeah, but really, no, like a really difficult kid. And so she didn't know what to do with me at one point in time, was just so upside down with this that she's like, I need help. And so she went to these parenting classes at the church, and this was her journal, her book from this. I opened this, reading about her and me as a 4-year-old, and I turned to a page, and it's got a prayer request on it, and it says, more or less, like, God, I need to know that you are with me, because I don't know what to do. Ryan is either going to grow up to do great things or end up in prison. And right now I'm very scared. And this is a sincere prayer, not sarcasm, y'all. I know I'm 4 at this point in time. And I know you're thinking like, how could she be like, why would she think that about a 4-year-old? And that's because I didn't grow up in your house. She knows exactly why she would have thought that about a 4-year-old. As I thought about this, if you've ever had a strong-willed child, that was me to the T growing up. When my mom wrote those words, and I was about 4, this was about the same time this happened that year. We were driving down the freeway, and she and her good friend were in the front seats of the minivan, and she's driving, and her friend is in the passenger seat, and I am getting in trouble for something. I forget what I did or didn't do or was being disrespectful or not. I can't remember. But essentially, like I'm getting in trouble for something, and I start to pitch a fit. I can't even remember the circumstances, but I do remember this. I lost my mind, and I got so frustrated and so ramped up that I actually opened the sliding door of the minivan on the freeway and started threatening to jump out. Yeah, see, I told you I was a difficult kid. And they had to pull over in a panic, thinking I was like, there would be me splatted on the ground on the freeway, like that was actually going to happen. This is a real story from that same year. It was not uncommon for me to get so worked up or so frustrated that I would have to get hauled out of restaurants when I was a young kid. And because it was no longer possible to keep me in the restaurant, I needed to go, and the restaurant owners would ask us to leave or something. There was a moment where we went to breakfast, same year, and we were down by the U of A, and they had to take me out of the restaurant, and I was so loud and had so lost my mind and was screaming so much that people on a Saturday morning were coming out of the neighborhoods around wondering if they needed to call the cops for help or intervention because somebody was being harmed. I was just screaming and yelling. So can you imagine being a mother trying to figure out what to do, how to de-escalate your kid and partner and do all these things in that moment? She was just like, I need help. Like I'm trying as hard as I can. I'm trying to figure these things out. I need a class. I need people. I need an army. Like I need something. I need a cage for this. I don't know. Right? Like she needed something. You know, there's more of those stories than I can possibly count, one of which I added this morning, and Seth was like, you can't share that with the church, so I'm not. But things are just complicated. And so I look back, and I think about my mom facing all of these moments and facing this thing. And you know what I respect and admired about her as I think through that journal? I think that while she was just doing her best to raise what was a very difficult son at that point in time and trying to not lose her mind along the way, she was facing a series of difficult circumstances. And instead of letting her circumstances and her frustrations run the show, something I really admire about my mom is she just kept showing up as the person that she was with consistency again and again. And sometimes she would tell you like she made mistakes and didn't do it right. And other times she felt like things went well, but she just kept showing up to love me right where I was. And I always knew that. Right? Trusting that God was with her, seeking to love me, and trusting him with a future. Trusting that he was with her because she didn't know what to do or where this was going. Friends, life can be crazy. But if God is with you, even in those moments, even in those circumstances, even when you're a young mom standing while people are coming out of their house wondering if somebody's being maimed or wounded, if God is with you, this is not the end of the story. This is your moment. Brings me to the second thing. If you're going to like who you are at the end of the day, then make this decision to be you when the day begins. If you're going to like who you are at the end of the day, make the decision to be you. It's to center in on what matters most when the day begins. Genesis chapter 39, verse 4. Joseph found favor in his sight, him being Potiphar, who's this guy in Egypt, and attended him. And Potiphar made him overseer of his house, put him in charge of all that he had. So this is this amazing moment. Joseph is showing up out of who he most wants to be. He's becoming successful. He's essentially gotten put in charge of everything in this guy's house. Like he becomes kind of second in terms of authority in this house, which is just crazy. Life is on the up and up. Things are getting better. And then it shifts. Life happens again. There's just a moment of difficulty. Potiphar's wife recognizes that she thinks Joseph is kind of attractive and wants to be with him. And so she tries to seduce him into being with her. Now he's faced with this weird temptation of a moment in this household where he's a slave. If you think about this for just a moment, if you're Joseph, like if you think back on Joseph in that moment and thinking of everything you might know, even if you're just being introduced to his story for the first time, but you know what he's been through, you know where he's been, you know he's been living as a slave, you know everything he's lost. If Joseph suddenly looks and he's like, you know what, I've had enough bad things, I don't care about how I impact other people, I'm making these choices right now, would you have blamed him? You'd look and you're like, yeah, it's a complicated story, it's been a hard life, think about it for a second, you would. Or have you ever had that moment in your life where you look and you go like, you know what, I have been through so many things, this is so frustrating, I have these circumstances and these circumstances, so is it gonna kill me to be a little selfish right now and to do this thing that isn't really who I am? Right? We can do all these things, we can create justifications and all this stuff that's in our head. This is what makes temptation in our life so difficult, is we lose ourselves because we let our circumstances determine who we are instead of coming from an anchored place in what matters most, in who we are already. What I love is this is not what Joseph does. Joseph has already decided who he wants to be. Joseph has already decided what matters most to him. And we know this because he speaks it directly in his response. Genesis 39, verse 8 through 9. It says, but he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, because of me, because of who I am, my master has no concern about anything in the house. And he has put everything that he has in my charge. I'm trustworthy. I value integrity. Verse 9, he is not greater in this house than I am. I value respect. I value honoring him. Nor has he kept anything back from me except you because you're his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Joseph, in the midst of this moment, when it would have been so simple to just be like, life has been horrible and hard, and I'm frustrated and disappointed, and I'm tired, and I just feel like I'm going to let some of my circumstances drive because of what I think I may or may not deserve or should or shouldn't do. What's amazing about this moment is Joseph pauses, looks at his life, thinks about who he is, thinks about who he really wants to be. Almost like that question, will I like who I am when all of this is said and done? And what's in his response? He goes, I don't want this for me. That's not who I am. I don't want this for my master. That's not what I most want. I don't even want this to be in my life when it comes to God and who he is with me and who I am with him. This isn't who I really want to be. This isn't who I really am. Friends, what would happen if you decided who you most want to be or what matters most to you before you even got to that difficult moment that you sometimes face? what would happen? What would happen if you woke up tomorrow, and I want to challenge you to do this, but not just tomorrow, to build this in like a practice. When you open your eyes and your head's still on that pillow before you've started thinking about 1,000 other things, when you wake up tomorrow, what would happen if you just partnered with God and prayed in a second and said, Lord, help me with this. Who do I want to be today? Who have you created me to be today? Who am I? And what do I want to center myself in? Maybe for you, you'll look and say, it's kindness. That's who I want to be today, because I've been in this place where there's a lot of resentment and bitterness and frustration, and that's not who I really am, and I feel like I'm kind of losing myself. God, center me in who you are so that I can step into the circumstances of my life with an anchor instead of getting tossed about like I'm in the wind. Maybe for you, it would be to be courageous. Maybe you've been avoiding something in your life and you're essentially going, and I'm losing myself in this. I feel like I'm getting smaller and smaller. And the reality is this isn't who I really am or what I really want. God, center me in the courage to be this, because I know I'm having a hard time finding it when I get to it. So help me to hold this like an anchor here. Maybe it's loving somebody and actually being a person who's centering in on love. Maybe it's being curious because you've got too many tensions and all your armors become up and all these different pieces, and you're pushing people and things away. You just need to open yourself up to being curious and open again, because that's who you are. I want you to think based on who God's made you to be, who you really are. As you open your eyes on that, with your head still on that pillow, who do you want to be? And then let that be like a compass that guides your day. Center on that, and here's what's going to happen. You will still face complexities. You will still face difficulties. You will still face moments of frustration, but you'll find that your feet are anchored in something that serves like a guide for your life. And this brings me to the last thing here this morning, and it's this. Let your future inform your present, which is just another way of saying play the long game, right? Let your future inform your present, play the long game. In the end, and this is a much larger story, much longer story than, again, that I'm telling you, Joseph eventually finds himself becoming a powerful person in the nation of Egypt. Joseph, through amazing circumstances, and I would so love you to read it, study it, like just enjoy it. Joseph becomes the second most powerful person in the nation of Egypt. He's put in charge of all of their food, all of their management, all of their storehouses, all of these things. It's really significant because there was a famine that was in the land, and God uses Joseph to strengthen Egypt in a way that protects everyone in the surrounding areas. It becomes a really, really big deal, right? This is a much larger story. Lo and behold, his dream from long ago comes true. This is a moment. His dream comes true. Joseph finds himself staring into the face of his brothers, and he's there because his brothers essentially, like they're dealing with famine and they don't have food and they're struggling and their family's hard up. And so they come to Egypt looking for resource, and who's the distributor of those resources? Who's in charge? It's Joseph, and all of a sudden the script flips and Joseph has all the power. Can you imagine if the person who's showing up in that moment was the same person that we encountered at the beginning of Joseph's story? You know what he would have done? He would have looked at him and like, haha, the power is mine now. Hey, so about that dream I told you guys, you remember that? You remember when I told you? Not once, but twice. You remember the dream? He could have done that. He could have gloated, flaunted all of that in their faces, couldn't he? He could have looked at him and like, you threw me in a pit, I threw you in a pit. Eye for an eye, fire with fire. He could have made a series of decisions to put his brothers in slavery, to sell them off, to create havoc for everybody, to do all of this stuff. He could have done so many of those things, and we would have been like, yeah, that's how the story should unfold. It makes sense. We'd be like, that didn't surprise us at all. But he doesn't do any of that this time, and it's taken some time to get here. Joseph does something different. He centers himself in who he is and what he most wants. And we read it in his response. Genesis chapter 45, beginning at verse 4. It says, so Joseph said to his brothers, come near to me, please. And they're going to suddenly recognize his face. This is Joseph. And they came near, and he said, I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. My life has had value and purpose. It's been important. Verse 6, for the famine has been in the land these 2 years. There are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. There's more difficulty in the horizon. There's more hardship to come. Verse 7, yet God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, to keep alive for you many survivors. My life has a story in it that's not just a blessing to myself, but bigger than my own life. It blesses other people. At the end of Joseph's story, I love this. At the end of Joseph's story, he's finally lived long enough to look back on his life and to realize that every time there was a moment of difficulty, a moment of hard circumstances, a moment of relational tension or problems, or even being thrown in prison or sold into slavery, or things that we would never even imagine for many of us. Even when those moments happened, he gets to see that by staying true to who he most desired to be, by not losing himself along the way, but being anchored in that, not only has his life become a blessing to himself, but he started to recognize his life was meant to be a blessing to others, and that's actually happened. Not because he got rid of all of his circumstances, not because he made all of the hard things go away, because of who he chose to be through them. See, that's like a real life for me and you, not a perfect one that none of us can attain, isn't it? That becomes something really, really powerful. When I was in my early 20s, I remember I was right on the verge of, I was engaged, right on the verge of getting married. And I found myself in this space where I don't know if you're like this, but before I step into like another major season of life, I was just reflective because it felt like one era was ending and a new one was beginning. And I took my mom out to lunch. We went and I sat on this patio outside, and we're just sitting outside having lunch and talking. And I'm thinking about life, and I'm thinking about my upbringing, and I'm thinking about myself as a kid, and I'm thinking about her as a mom, and all of this stuff. And I just found myself being really reflective. I don't know if you know this, but you know when you get to that spot as an adult where you suddenly recognize how complicated life actually is? And suddenly the people that seemed like one-dimensional become three-dimensional, and you realize, even about your own parents sometimes, you're like, I don't love everything that they did, and I don't approve of every message, so to speak, but also I see complex people trying to do the best with what they had in those things, and you just start to realize, like, they did better than I thought they would sometimes. And I found myself just being really grateful for my mom and trying to navigate so many of these things. And so I just looked at her and I said, you know what? I want you to know, I think you were a really good mom. And I say that knowing I'm a really difficult kid. And I've not been the easiest person to raise. Like, I recognize this fully for myself. I own it. And yeah, I looked at my mom and just said, I always knew that you loved me. And I always knew that you wanted good things for me. And so much of who I am is because of you. And so I just feel like I'm in my 20s now. It's probably about the right time for me to just look at you and say, thank you. I really, really, I'm really grateful to have had a mom like you. And I said this to her. I think it's the first time I'd ever done something quite like that and just thought that way and said this. I was thinking about this last week. And you know what I wish? I wish the young mom who wrote in that journal when I was 4 could have just been magically teleported to that table that day so that she could see my mom and I now, and she could hear those words. Because the young mom back then is staring into this moment with a kid on the street, or this moment with a kid in the van, or this moment with a kid in 1,000 other illustrations and stories and moments going, I don't know what to do, and I'm trying, and God, please be with me, because I don't want his story to end this way, right? And yet, by showing up to be the person that she just was, by loving me in the way that she was. And it wasn't perfect, and it wasn't exactly the way. I'm sure she changed things or different things along the way. But by just being who she was, there's something about her life that became a bigger blessing than just her own life. But it transformed mine too, and blessed me too. This is what it is for our lives. This is what happens with Joseph, because when you show up, friends, this is huge. When you show up to the difficulties and tensions and frustrations and circumstances of this life in a way that stays centered on who you really are and what you really want, your life becomes a blessing to you because you like who you are when all's said and done. But when you live that way of who God's made you to be, it becomes a blessing to others because it impacts people. The circumstances don't have to go away for that to become real and vibrant and true. That's what I'm thankful for with my mom. Friends, may you learn to ask the question, will I like who I am when this moment has passed? May you know that even here, even now, God is with you. May you choose to anchor yourself when the day begins so that you like yourself when the day ends. And may you live anticipating a future where God is using a person just like you to be a blessing in the lives of other people in this very weird and complicated thing that we call life.